Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my NACL Winners Round 1 overview and analysis. We are here. It is spring playoff time here in the NACL. The regular season is done. The tiebreakers are dusted. It is time to get into the games that really matter. We are going to be going over the first 8 series of the playoffs in this video here. That means every single winners, main bracket series that happened over the course of the weekend. I will be releasing another video later this week that covers the losers round 1 as well as winners round 2, so stay tuned for that. But there's a lot of games to cover, so I figured I'd break it up into 2 parts here. So in this video, we're going to be going over that winners round 1 bracket. If you are excited, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you guys think of the series that are happening? Who impressed you and who surprised you, maybe not moving on in the way that you'd expect or not being able to dominate in the way that you'd expect? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback, of course, on everything down in the comment section below. Of course, I'll be giving all my thoughts as we go through the video. I'll be going through all 8 series, talking about which teams I think played well, which teams I think did not play well, and potentially where I think these teams could stand moving into the next couple of rounds with what they showed in this series. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. It's split across 2 days. We'll be starting with the first day here and kicking off day number 1. It was a matchup between our number 1 seed and our number 16 seed, the best team versus the worst team in the regular season. We had Cloud9 Challengers taking on CLG Faith. And C9 seed gets the job done here, and it's not particularly close. A very strong 2-0. Remember, early part of the playoffs here is going to be best of 3. I believe once we hit winners round 4, or just round 4 in general, that turns into a best of 5. And so for now, it's best of 3, but it will eventually turn into best of 5. So for Cloud9, I mean, this is a huge, huge dominant win. I mean, this series was not close even a little bit. You can see that in the scores, but somehow I think it was even less close than the scores would indicate. There was never even a single moment where it felt like CLG was in this series really all that much, and it's not really all that surprising. This was a team that went 1-29 in the regular season for a reason. They only had 1 win over one of the other worst teams in the league in FlyFam, and even outside of that, like, they weren't really competitive in a lot of their losses either. They've tried shifting around some roster pieces. Town has come in for Saranok in the mid lane. Aaron came in for Plux, and Sketch moved back down to support. There's a lot of changes, a lot of ideas that have kind of been thrown at the wall for CLG. It just doesn't feel like any have stuck. But Cloud9's just way too good, right? Like, this team is one of the best in the entire region. Like, I think they could probably beat out on some lower tier LCS teams. They genuinely are really, really solid, and it's just not fair to have this carry duo in the NACL. They are, quite frankly, so much better than the average carry duo that going up against a team like CLGF, it just feels unfair to have Diplex and Lost as a duo because they're just at such a high level. Diplex is going to get my player of the series here. That LeBlanc game in Game 2 was absolutely disgusting from him. Really, really good stuff. I mean, Town on the other side had a pretty abysmal series, which we'll get to, but Diplex was awesome. He's proving that, a lot of the haters from his time in the LCS just didn't really have a lot of ground to stand on. Yes, his laning stats aren't perfect, but he might genuinely be one of the best mid to late game mid laners in the entire region. I honestly think he's relatively comparable to a player like Bjergsen right now, which is pretty high praise. I would say Bjergsen's obviously a little bit better, but, Diplex I don't think is super far off from that kind of playstyle and that kind of impact on the game, and that isn't to bring down Bjerg. It's really to hype up a player like Diplex, who I just think is really, really good right now. Obviously, he's been proving it ever since he got sent down here to the NACL, replaced by Eminus. And of course, Eminus is doing great on the LCS. We'll get to that later in the week when we do my LCS video, but Diplex is also really, really good. Lost and Zeyzal have really, really stepped it up. Now, they're not the most consistently dominant bot lane in the league. There are a couple bot lanes that I'm super high on right now. 100 Thieves obviously come to mind. FlyQuest obviously come to mind. Golden Guardians come to mind, but Cloud9's, I think they're in that zone, right? Maybe just a little bit below, like, the best bot lanes in the entire region. Lost and Zeyzal can have some really good performances. They do a really good job beating up on teams and team structures that are worse than them. In this case, that's definitely the case, and I think they do a really good job being consistent in those regards. There are going to be some games where they are a little bit pushed. I would say that we saw that, towards the end of the regular season. Lost didn't necessarily have the most dominant of laning phases, but for the most part, I would definitely consider them a positive, and obviously they obliterated this series. Tomio had complete and utter control over the jungle both games here. NXI pulling out his signature Rumble in the jungle pick, and It just wasn't going to work out. You needed something kind of crazy, maybe to go up against a team like Cloud9. Not sure Rumble was that pick. It just didn't really click in the same way that I think a lot of them wanted it to. Tomio was really, really, really good in this series. The Vi, you got to get a head on. He absolutely got a head on it. And then Fake God, you got to report him. He gave away the only 2 deaths in the entire series. No deaths in Game 1, only 2 in Game 2, and both of them going to the Gnar. He still was really good. I mean, he dominated that top lane matchup, but I mean, come on, report him. Should have gone deathless. Should have gone deathless. The 2 deaths are not acceptable. Overall, Cloud9 just way too good. This team is unbelievably strong. As for CLG on the other side, they're just not very good. I mean, winning only 1 game across the regular season kind of shows the strength of this team. They're going to be hoping and praying that they can pull off some miracle in the lower bracket run, because obviously they don't want to be one of the teams that is fighting for their lives in that relegation tournament, because they are a provisional amateur team. That's really looking like it's on the cards for CLGF right now, and I really don't see a lot of ways for them to be able to get out of it. It doesn't feel like anybody on this team has particularly been stepping up. I think Aaron and Sketch have had moments. Aaron in particular, I think, has had moments where he's looked okay. NXI had a good series towards the end of the year, but outside of that, I really don't think anybody on this team has really stepped up. My dud of the series is going to go to Town, because that mid lane matchup was just utterly brutalized by Cloud9. Tomio definitely spending some time mid lane and then getting Diplex out on the map, and Town was just in no position to be able to match or even try and compete with a lot of that. And so, unfortunate there, but you could give it to basically anybody. CLG's kind of got run over in this series. It's going to happen. I mean, this is kind of what we expected between the number 1 and the number 16 team in the region. So, not particularly surprised to see CLGF moving down to the bottom bracket, but really excited to see Cloud9 come out and prove that they deserve to be that number 1 seed, that, you know, people calling them, me included, the best team in the NACL are justified in saying that. I think that their carry duo is unstoppable when they're playing at a high level. Tomio's been fantastic over the course of the last few weeks. Zeyzal is one of the best supports in the entire region. This team is just so stacked from top to bottom that I just find it really hard to imagine a world in which they really underperform in this tournament. Moving on to our second series of day number 1, though, or I guess these two were played at the same time, so I guess you could say the other first series of day number 1. It was definitely one that I was looking forward to. We had Cincinnati Fear taking on Evil Geniuses Challengers, and the Fear take it. They take it 2-0, and they take it pretty dominantly. They are clearly the better team across these two, which, obviously, if you would have said that in the preseason, that would have been a pretty wild take. I know some people were going for that, but obviously, look at them now. I mean, the Fear are one of the best teams in the NACL, period, full stop. Evil Geniuses really struggling right now, which we will get to, you know, both of those being true. Fear coming in as the number 4 seed because they did end up winning that tiebreaker at the end of the regular season, which obviously is great for them, but it meant that they were matched up against a team like Evil Geniuses, which I do think there is a chance, you know, EG kind of turns it around. This was a series that I wasn't going to say I was worried about, but Evil Geniuses, in my opinion, one of the better lower teams in the standings right now, at least in terms of talent level, if everything were to click. I think Shaden and Ryoma as a jungle mid duo are scary when they're playing at their best, but it just hasn't been their best this season, and definitely towards the back half of the season. So let's go ahead and talk about it. On the side of Fear, there's just a lot of good to say about how this team has really performed as of recent. Everybody knows that I'm high on basically everyone on this team at this point. I think almost all of them have become underrated in terms of their individual player rankings amongst some of the other players in the NACL. I think that, you know, Faisal in the top lane's awesome. Shochi is one of my favorite mid laners in the entire region. Manui's only improved throughout the season, and Trevor is the hidden gem of the NACL. But my player of the series has to go to Perry in the jungle. Of course, I've also been very high on Perry, not only this season, but last season as well when he was brought in for Dignitas. It felt like he is just a player that is criminally underrated by the community. One of the better junglers in the NACL, one of the more consistent junglers in the NACL, which I think is a huge trait for that role, especially right now in this current meta. Going up against one of the most talented junglers in Shaden, this was always going to be an interesting matchup, probably the matchup of the series for me. Mid lane definitely in that conversation as well, but this was the matchup of the series, and it definitely went the side of Fear. Perry was awesome on 2 games of Wukong here. This is a champion he's played a lot over the course of the year so far, and it's very much been a positive pick for Fear. You can look at their draft in game number 1, and you can see a lot of the comfort picks that they've kind of defaulted to over the course of the year. Perry on the Wukong, Shochi on the Ori, Trevor on the Soraka. These are things that this team really does like to pull out rather consistently, and for them to be able to generate such a large lead in that game 1 from it, obviously, you know, it was a little bit closer than maybe the score would indicate. 29 minutes little bit of a closer game than that, but I would say it was still definitely in favor of Fear. Game number 2, however, on the other side, that was a blowout. This was the dominant one where Perry took over, where Shochi had a great game. Trevor was phenomenal in this game on the Thresh. I want to give him a big shout out. It's really the main culprits, I would say, for Fear, and that's not to take away from Anui and Faisal, who also won. Like, they won hard, and they were better than their opponents in this game. I'm just so high on what this jungle mid does as a duo. I really like when Shochi's out on the map, when he's kind of given the luxury to be able to play a little bit more for the macro than for his lane. Not to say that his lane was bad, but getting out of Ryoma on the Tristana, like, if that pick doesn't get ahead, it's going to be pretty useless. You're going to be able to get that Wukong really strong, and then going into something like the Talia, that's just, it's a recipe for disaster on the side of Evil Geniuses if you're not able to make plays. And they weren't able to make plays. You have Trevor looking fantastic on the Thresh. I really like him on Hook Champions, obviously. I've talked about him on these more, like, long-range engagers. Things like the Ashe definitely come to mind for Trevor, but Soraka's obviously been a big pick for them. I think the Nautilus, the Thresh have also been really good for him. He's just a very versatile, very consistent support. Again, I don't really understand why we're not talking about him as one of the best supports in the NACL, because he just has been over the course of the year. Certainly one of the most consistent, and it just doesn't feel like he's ever been in that conversation in the conversations that I've had, and I don't get it. He's awesome. He's super duper good. Perry, Trevor, definitely the two standout members in this series for me, but again, everybody kind of living up to the billing in this one. As for Evil Geniuses on the other side, just disappointing. Like, I have nothing else to say. I want this team to succeed because I do like the players, but it's just not in the cards for them right now. I can't even begin to tell you what is going on. I'm not sure if it's a morale thing, if it's just, you know, consistency. Like, a lot of the players that have played really well for them, even this year, a player like Shaden, who through the first 3 or so weeks of the season was looking like one of the best junglers in the region, like, has just completely fallen off a cliff. He takes these really early aggressive trades, and almost none of them have been working out because the rest of the team is just not willing to back him up. I'm not exactly sure if it's just a communication thing or what it is, but Shaden is the one who directly struggles from it. He's going to get my dud of the series here. Perry was just so much better than him in this series, and, you know, I'm not going to say that that's unacceptable, right? Because Perry is a good player, but Shaden cannot be getting this hard out jungled in a playoff series. Like, that is just not what you signed him for. You swapped over one of the best junglers in the league to bring him into your organization in Tomio, and so you really needed his step up. You really needed his early games to be a lot better, and they just weren't. The Lee Sin in game 1, while it was okay, it certainly wasn't great. And the Talia Tristana, you know, mid-jungle in game 2 just did not work out even a little bit. You're relying a lot on this jungle when you look at the construction of how this team works. Ryoma's a good player, but he's not going to be able to solo carry by himself in this meta from the mid lane. It's just kind of hard to do that at the moment. Mobility and Smoothie, you know, they've been okay. Smoothie, maybe not so much, but Mobility's been all right, but he's certainly not a hard carry at the NACL level. Soul is on tank duty. You need this jungle to step up. You need the pressure coming in. You need the macro advantage, and you're just not getting it right now coming out from Evil Geniuses. It's disappointing, but if they continue to play like this, if Topside in general continues to play like this team is not going to win a series in the playoffs. They're just not. They're really going to need to rely on some upgrades coming out from their two best players in Shaden and Ryoma. Of course, Soul needs to be better on the top side. Mobility has been pretty consistent, but, you know, putting him on Senatom Kench duty just isn't exactly going to work when the top side is losing. And so, overall, Evil Geniuses have some major question marks that they need to answer. I've been waiting on this team to turn it around for weeks now, but it just has not been happening. And if they continue up this pace, I just don't see an opportunity for them to even be able to win a series at all in the playoffs. And then for Fear, I mean, this team looks really, really good. They're going to get tested in the next round, basically no matter who they play against. This is really where it starts to pick up. And so we're really going to get a good idea of where Fear is at once we get into that next video. But they definitely passed their first playoff test, and I couldn't be anything but excited for how the future of this team is going to look. Moving on now to our third series of day number 1 here in the NACL winners bracket. And this is a good one. It's number 8 versus number 9, the closest two seeds to face off against each other. And these two teams have actually played 3 games very recently. We had Wildcard Gaming taking on Team Liquid Challengers. And TLC picks up a very close 2-1 series win. This is probably the series of the weekend for me in the NACL. An absolute blast to watch these two teams go up against each other. Wildcard pulling out all of the tricks in their bag, all of their signature pocket picks. 3 games of Garen top, 3 games of Karthus in the jungle. We got the Scion mid in game number 2. So many things going on here, and TLC being willing to give them over and say, we can counter this. We're going to let you have the Garen. We're going to let you have the Karthus because we know that we can beat it. We know we have picks that are going to do really well into it. And credit to TLC, they were able to come out on top in this series 2-1. Of course, these two teams played 3 games in the final week of the season. They had their best of 2, and then they had to play a tiebreaker to see who got side selection for this. That Wildcard ended up winning, of course, which was really big overall for them. They, of course, go on to win game number 1 in relatively dominant fashion with a lot of their pocket picks. You got the Gragas mid, you've got the Blitzcrank in the support position, then, of course, Garen Karthus. You know, stuff that Wildcard has definitely felt comfortable pulling out all year long. And so you're sitting here going, Wildcard, I guess, just has TLC's number, but, you know, you got this TLC team that has been underrated and undervalued, I think, all split long. They didn't necessarily have the most consistent of teams, but when they did all play together, they looked very strong as a unit, and that definitely tracked in this series. This is the first time in a while I can say APA, Arrow, Kimdown, the 3 best players on TLC, all played well at the same time. And as we learned across both of the final 2 games here, that is a recipe for success for this team. My player of the series could go to quite a few people. I'm going to give it to Arrow. I think Kimdown also absolutely deserves this award. Both of the bot laners I thought played at a super high level in this series, and that's really good to see. It felt like Kimdown was playing really well earlier on in the season, especially towards the middle weeks, and then it kind of felt like he was falling off a bit, maybe making some risky aggressive plays, being out of position a bit, just as Arrow was stepping up and becoming a much more consistent carry for this team. To see them both show up and just be awesome in the bot lane in this series is definitely a good sign. Arrow on the Jinx was definitely a lot better than it was on the Aphelios. His ability to, I guess, play around that early to mid game a little bit better. Jinx obviously has a little bit more fight power, I would say, in the mid game. Not that Aphelios is bad, but it's just a little bit more situational when it comes to Aphelios. I think you can do a little bit more with Jinx, especially if your team wants to play around you. Especially look at this comp more. You got the Lee Sin in the jungle. You've got the Annie that can roam. Hell, even the Cho'Gath in that game number 3. You've got more options for these like extended trades, I would say, in game number 3. And I think that definitely benefited Arrow. But his positioning in a lot of these games was spectacular. If they didn't have him towards the back half of game number 3, that very close game that TLC ended up taking could have been definitely a loss. I mean, Lens was playing out of his mind on the Draven. He had a really good game in game number 3. It was very close, but Arrow, a big reason why they were able to capitalize on that. And then Kimdown in the support position was also really good. It's really good to see these two play well in the same series. I think Kimdown has honestly gotten a little bit underrated over the course of the year so far. I think he's been pretty solid as a support. Not the most consistent support in the entire league. There are going to be some series where he's just not as good as whoever his opponent is, but when he's on, he looks good, and I think he was on, especially in that game number 3 on the Renata, where it felt like those ultimates were super influential towards the back half of the game. I also want to give a huge shout out to APA. I think if he had played a little bit better in game number 2 on the Annie, or at least a little bit more flashy in game number 2 on the Annie, he might have gotten my player of the series here. That Cho'Gath game in game 3 might have just been the player of the game, right? The best game and the most important game of the series. APA is just the best player on TLC, and it's not particularly close. He is ridiculously close to just being like, put him up on the main roster now. Harry's not exactly lighting the world on fire, and APA is awesome for TLC. If that team continues to struggle, it's certainly a conversation I expect the organization to be having. But he was great. Mir looked a lot better on the Lee Sin. Bradley had the counter picks to the Garen in the top lane. TLC just kind of played their game, and they played it at a high level, and you got to give them a lot of credit for that. As for Wildcard on the other side, it's frustrating that you weren't able to pick up the win in this series, but you did look very competitive, and I think that there are some positives to take away from this. I do think that Moose Hater looks good on the Garen, although it does seem that teams have at least practiced against it, and maybe going into like the best of 3s and the best of 5s, teams are going to be prepared to let it through and, you know, have counters ready to play against it. It'll be interesting. Teams did not want to let that go in the regular season, and when they did, it became pretty problematic, so it'll be interesting to see if that meta adjusts for the playoffs. Keel has always been a little bit of a, you know, not a stranger, I would say, to crazy wild AP jungle picks. The Karthus, the Nunu come to mind as things that he's always willing to pull out. 3 games of Karthus here to pair up with, you know, these more supportive, I would say, mid laners, the Gragas, the Sion, things like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get absolutely blasted in game number 3, and there really isn't a lot that you can do, and unfortunately, that's why Keel's going to get my dud of the series. I felt like he was the worst player in the pivotal game number 3, which is unfortunate, I guess, in the long run, because I really do think this bot lane stepped up and almost single-handedly won Wildcard this final game of the series, and this series in general. Lenz in particular was phenomenal on this Draven, one of the best performances he's put in all year long. I've been saying I actually think the bot lane for Wildcard is probably the weaker part of the team. You see a lot of focus put, of course, on the top side when Moose Hater gets these crazy picks, but Keel and Saligo have really been, like, the consistently great pieces for Wildcard over the course of the season, so to see Lenz and Duo King really step up in the playoffs when it mattered in that Game 3 is impressive stuff. Unfortunately, it was just barely not enough, and now Wildcard is going to be moving down to loser's bracket. They have a matchup against CLG Faith next week, and the loser of that is in the relegation tournament. Wildcard is actually one series away from being in that after going 18-12 in the regular season. Obviously, they should be able to take care of business against the CLG Faith team that is really struggling, but they put themselves in a pretty awkward position by losing this series. They're going to have to bounce back pretty quickly. As for Team Liquid, their schedule does not get easier either. They now move on to face the best team in the NACL in Cloud9 in that round 2, so a difficult matchup for them as well, but if APA, Arrow, Kim Down, Mirror, Bradley, if they can all get on the same page and all have good series at the same time, I mean, Cloud9 could be a team that is, you know, maybe a little bit surprised by how good this Team Liquid team actually is. And then moving on to our 4th and final series of the first day of Winners Round 1 here. We had the number 5 seed going up against the number 12 seed. It was Golden Guardians Challengers taking on AOE Gold, 2 teams in the same organization. Of course, Golden Guardians being the Challengers team to Golden Guardians, and AOE being kind of the provisional amateur team for Golden Guardians after the buyout earlier on this year, or at least the merger earlier on this year. So always good to see those, you know, in kind of pivotal best-of-3 playoff series. It's kind of a cool little matchup here. Unfortunately for AOE, GGC was just a little bit better in this one, and they're going to take the series 2-0. Game number 1 was a little bit interesting, kind of back and forth, but overall definitely still favored in Golden Guardians. The second game was just a blowout, very much Golden Guardians favored. It wasn't even really all that close in that one. When you're talking about the players that kind of separated themselves for GGC in this series, my first thought goes to my player of the series, Rosethorn in the jungle. Now, a lot of things can be said, I would say, about this Golden Guardians Challengers team. I think at the beginning of the year, when you're talking about the first week or 2 of the season, you're looking at Young in the mid lane as being the big carry for this team, playing incredibly well and helping them get out to, you know, at least a reasonable start. Obviously, they didn't start fantastic, but he was the one kind of keeping them alive. That slowly transitioned into them wanting to play a lot more around bot lane and getting Array to really start popping off. He had a fantastic middle and end of the season. Prismal also really stepped it up, I would say, towards the second half of the year, and they were awesome. But we were still worried about topside, and I was saying this around like week 5-ish, where I was like, if Concept and Rosethorn can be just average players, this team's bot side is enough to be able to carry them to be one of the more dangerous teams in the league. Well, I got way more than what I asked for. They were not just average over the back half of the season. Rosethorn in particular has really started to emerge over the last week or 2, and it has been a lot of fun to watch. He definitely deserved player of the series in this one. Not only was he taking over games early on, using his pressure on champions like Lee Sin to be able to make a pick like Pantheon relatively worthless, because you really need to dominate the early game with that, but also just facilitating everything else that's going on the map. I mean, your 30 assists in 2 games is not particularly easy, especially at a pro level. I know it's not all about KDA, and trust me, it's not, but like, go watch the game. He's everywhere on the map. He's making Array and Prismal look fantastic in that bot lane, especially on that Jinx Blitzcrank in game 2. Young has a ton of pressure in the mid lane on the Sylas. Concept gets to pull out the Garen, which has become an NACL staple. There's just so much control on the map for Golden Guardians, and I attribute a lot of that to how Rosethorn was able to just generate such a large lead in the early game. I'm just hoping that he's able to keep up playing like this, because I like Array and Prismal. I think they've been good. Rosethorn's been awesome as of recent. Obviously, I don't think Young had the best of final weeks of the season in the regular season, but this was a really good series from him. He was better than Darkwings, who was very much on the up and up, I would say, throughout the back half of the season. So Golden Guardians just looking incredibly good, in my opinion. Not really a lot to complain about. If Array can keep up being this big hyper carry in the bot lane, and you have facilitators like Prismal Prismal and Rosethorn and Young and Concept stepping up. Like, this could very well be a top 4 team in the league if everything goes right. There are a lot of good teams in the league, though, and they're going to have to prove that in the future series. As for AOE, definitely disappointing that you weren't able to take a game here. It felt like this team was definitely getting better as the season went on. I really was low on them at the beginning of the year. It felt like they were just kind of below everyone else, but just above the bottom teams in the league, right? The bottom 3 felt kind of separated, and then there was AOE. They always felt like they were locked in that 13th spot. Now, obviously, Evil Geniuses definitely struggled down the stretch, and AOE jumps up to number 12 here, but you know, a lot of that was AOE's schedule getting a little easier. It was also them improving. I don't want to make it seem like it was anything else. Darkwings, especially over the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season, was one of the better mid laners in the NACL, in my opinion. It felt like Lynx and Skytech were getting a little bit more consistent. Winnie was getting more consistent. It felt like AOE was developing a style just a tad bit more. Unfortunately, that didn't quite translate to a matchup against a really good Golden Guardians Challengers team in this series. My dud of the series is going to go to Lynx in the bot lane. The bot lane in general just did really not hold up in this series. The Senna Tom Genshin Game 1. We're seeing a lot of teams try this out right now in the NACL. I'm not exactly sure it's going to stick. I do think that Senna and Tom can be strong in certain, but late game hyper carries are still really good. I mean, Jinx, Aphelios, those kinds of champions are still incredibly relevant right now, and I would argue maybe even more so. It's not, you know, Zeri. It's not Zeri anymore. It's not Lucian anymore, but I still think these like hyper carries in the bot lane are things that you want to try and play towards, and I just don't know if Senna necessarily facilitates that style, especially when it feels like you would most likely want to play for your mid lane on this team and you pick the Victor with the Viego. That's a lot of expectation that your jungle is going to be able to survive early. Unfortunately, that just doesn't happen in Game 1. In Game 2, you go for this hyper early game comp. You go for the Caitlyn Lux. You go for the Pantheon in the jungle. You don't really have a lot of options if you end up losing this early. Yes, Syndra and Ornn scale relatively well, but you're going into something like Jinx. Like, you're just not going to be able to deal with that in the back half of the game. And unfortunately, they lost the early game, and from that point onwards, it was just kind of over. If the bot lane was slightly better, I think that this could have been more interesting, but it certainly wasn't just Lynx and Skytech's fault, even though I do think that they were probably the worst lane in this series. Lynx just had no pressure on the map, especially on that Senna pick, and then Skytech in general has just kind of been mad this year. He's had some really good games, but I think for the most part, he's just not really one of the supports that has stood out to me. I've always been a little bit lower, I would say, on Skytech, and I think that kind of showed itself in this series. I think Darkwings took a little bit of a step back. He was awesome over the back half of the season and just didn't really translate here. Going up against a player in Young, who I think was, you know, kind of and not as good over the back half of the season, if I'm being completely honest. And so you were kind of hoping for a step-up performance there. You didn't quite get it, and then Winnie just got out-jungled. There really is no other way to put it. If you lose early on the Pantheon in Game 2, that game is completely over for you. And so unfortunately, that was it. Gamsu had some moments, especially in Game 1 on the Cho'Gath, where he was incredibly strong towards the back half of the game and very difficult to deal with, but a Cho'Gath can only do so much by himself with the team. Yes, I do think the pick is incredibly strong. I've been saying it for weeks now, but, you know, if he's your only carry, if he's your hyper carry, it's just probably not going to work out in the way that you want it to. So AOE looking okay, not necessarily fantastic, but, you know, this is a team that absolutely could go on and win a losers bracket series for sure. They're going to have an interesting matchup against Evil Geniuses Challengers that we saw earlier in the day. I think that there is a chance that they can win that. I think on paper, they're probably the less talented team, but they've certainly been the team that I think has been performing better as of recent, so that's going to be interesting. And then Golden Guardians, now with the win, moves on to face the Cincinnati Fear in Winners Round 2, which is a super intriguing matchup. I'm very excited to cover that one. Golden Guardians is one of those teams that I think can win any series, and especially if you get your jungle stepping up like this, the consistency that you've gotten out of bot lane, that could be a very, very fun series to watch. But that's going to do it for our first day. That means it's time now to jump into day number 2. And we kick day 2 off with the highest seed in the second day, the number 2 seed going off against the 15th seed. And it was Dignitas Challengers taking on FlyFam. And Dig was able to take the 2-0 win. Now, this wasn't nearly as dominant as Cloud9's win over CLG Faith earlier in the week, but Dignitas was still able to get the job done. They were still able to not drop a game, which is, in my opinion, the very least that they could do in this series. Obviously, FlyFam, a team that I think has looked better as of recent, maybe, you know, better than 15th, maybe 14th, somewhere around there, especially with Hyper coming in. I think the bot lane's been playing better. You know, there have definitely been some upgrades, I would say, to this team's mentality, but they still should have no chance of going up against a team like Dignitas and actually being able to take them on. Now, credit to them, they had some pretty good early games in this series. I actually thought Hyper's early games in particular particular were pretty solid. He got instinct some gold, especially on this Senna. Blaze was moving around the map. There were moments where FlyFam was looking okay. It's just after 15 minutes or so, the game just devolves into them not being as good as their opponents, and it becomes a lot more difficult for them to win games because of that. And so Dignitas able to take the 2-0 series. My player of the series is going to go to Spawn on the side of Dignitas. This is really what I wanted to see. I wanted to see Spawn get back into the NACL, be given another opportunity to kind of be a big carry on a smaller stage. Obviously, you know, was put in the LCS. It seems a little too early. I certainly didn't think it was too early, but was put in the LCS and just kind of lost his confidence, stopped playing with any sort of aggression, and just kind of gave up trying to win lane. And that's a problem. Like, you really can't do that at a high level. It seemed that's what it was, at least. And back here in Academy, back here in the NACL, it feels like he feels a lot more comfortable playing at this level because he is carrying games. Like, he has been fantastic for this team ever since he returned. He has been one of the more consistent AD carries in the entire league. Yes, it's a much smaller sample size than maybe a lot of the other ADCs, but I consider him on the same level as what Tomo was before he left. I think that they are very similar players. At least in terms of talent-wise. I don't think playstyle-wise they're the exact same. Spawn a little bit more late-game focused, Tomo a little bit more early-game focused, but Spawn definitely gets the job done. That Sivir game in Game 2 was awesome. Ezreal in Game 1 was still really good. It's just really nice to see Spawn continue to grow, continue to advance, and continue to play really well here for Dignitas when given another opportunity to kind of take over at this stage, kind of similar to what he did last year. There's also Diamond in the support position. 2 games of Ashe. It's not really something that Dignitas has pulled out a ton over the course of the year. A little bit, I mean, here or there, I would say, but Diamond not somebody that can really be taken off of anything. The guy's champion pool is absolutely massive. He's crushing in pretty much every relevant statistic in the league, and he kind of proved that on the Rift again here. Diamond has those games every once in a while where it's just like, how do you play against him in the early game? He is incredibly oppressive, and obviously him and Tomo had great chemistry from playing together for 3+ years at that point. I was interested to see if him and Spawn were going to be the same level of structure, the same level of power on that side of the map, just, you know, immediately, because obviously Tomo and Diamond had that synergy, but Spawn and Diamond, not so much. It's good to see that the overall talent does win out between these two players. They have arguably been just as good as Tomo and Diamond were before they left, and that is a huge positive for Dignitas. And then the rest of the team also played well. I think Hoon has been really good this year for Dignitas. Honestly, like, I know that I'm a little bit of a Hoon hater from 2022. I think I was justified in not liking the tape that he showed last year, even at the Academy level. But he's really stepped up his game. He's played so much better. I know he's talked in interviews about the mental, you know, going into this team and about how this is maybe his favorite team that he's ever played with in terms of the atmosphere and the synergy surrounding the team and the communication. That's just such a huge bonus, and I think that Hoon is definitely someone who has very much capitalized and grown because of that synergy and because of that atmosphere. It just goes to show you what good mental can do. Spawn's another example of good mental and confidence. I think Hoon, Spawn, 2 players that haven't necessarily shown perfect things on tape before, but you put them in an atmosphere where they're going to feel a lot more comfortable and they're going to be able to explore a bit more. XU's maybe been the best jungler in the NACL. Insanity, I still think, you know, was a little bit off this split, but it's good to see him have a really good series. Yes, into a weaker mid here in Blaze, but I still think he looked good. Overall, Spawn, Diamond, definitely the standouts, but Hoon, XU, even Insanity, all really stepping up and playing well for Dignitas here. For FlyFam on the other side, obviously you were going to lose this series. I don't think it was really ever a contest. Like, I hate to say that. It would have been a massive upset, though, if they were to have picked up a victory here. Unfortunately for them, they just weren't able to, although I do think they played relatively well. I got to give a ton of credit to Hyper's early game. Some crazy picks here. Viego, not too crazy, but the Nocturne, we really don't see that being pulled out much in 2023. I understand the dive potential that something like Nocturne Camille gives you, but I'm just not necessarily sure if that's what I would go in a win or go home game number 2. You pull out the Senna Cho'Gath in game number 2. I actually really like this lane, especially if the Cho'Gath is the one gaining the CS. And so, you know, there's obviously an idea here to get to these late game team fights with the Camille and the Nocturne diving the backline, trying to eliminate things like the Sivir, maybe even the Veigar, and that leaves Annie, Senna, and Cho'Gath to really be able to take care of the front line. Cho'Gath does great into tanks, and so he can deal with that relatively easily. And Senna does have damage towards the back half of the game, and so I understand the idea for this. I think, unfortunately, when it comes to FlyFam, the problem that they ran into is that they're just not as good as Dignitas Challengers. They weren't able to get to that late game in the same way that they wanted to. Their mid games were okay. I certainly wouldn't say they were great. Their early games were okay, and their late games were bad. That's really kind of the diagnosis I have, which is to be expected from a team that, quite frankly, is just not as talented. But FlyFam is clearly an upgrade right now to whatever they were at the beginning of the season. This version of this team is a lot better. My dud of the series, unfortunately, though, is going to go to Lunacia in the top lane. He just just felt like the least valuable member of the team. There were moments where Hyper looked good, moments where Instinct and Sword looked good, moments where Blaze looked good. I just didn't think we had nearly enough of those of Lunacia. I'm a little bit lower on him as a player. I still think he's, you know, good potential, and obviously his laning can be incredibly dangerous to go into. He's like top 5 or 6 in solo kills in the NACL right now. Maybe he's fallen down a bit on that ladder in the last few weeks, but I think he doesn't really know what to do when he generates gold leads, and those gold leads don't exactly come super often, and so just a little bit of question marks about how sustainable it actually is going to be for Lunacia. I think maybe if you get him on a better team that has players around him that can actually maybe take some of the pressure off of him in the top lane, that could definitely potentially help because he's a carry-oriented top. He probably wants these solo 1v1 matchups, but I just don't know if I'm, like, super believing in him right now as, like, a top-tier NACL top laner. He absolutely can get there one day. The mechanics are there. It's just about getting that consistency down, which just isn't there at the moment. Unfortunately for FlyFam, they are also a team that is probably going to be looking to do anything they can to not get relegated. That's got to be the mindset for them moving into the final part of this tournament, because it's a very real possibility. There are a lot of really good teams in Amateur right now, and this loss means that you are one series, unfortunately, closer to that. As for Dignitas on the other side, obviously this team's goal is to win the finals. Like, they really are, you know, number 2 seed. They looked really good in the regular season. I'm a little bit lower on this team. I think that the consistency needs to really amp up for them. Insanity is someone who I'm a little bit worried about. I want to see Spawn and Diamond really compete against some of the top bot lanes in the league, because they really haven't up until this point, and there's a lot of teams in the NACL that I think have grown a ton over the last few weeks. Dignitas certainly has a tough road ahead of them, but they absolutely are talented enough to get over it. It's all just about if they're going to do it. Moving on now to our second series of day number 2. And it's an interesting one. I think maybe this one was a little bit more of a blowout than the one before it, which I guess isn't too shocking, but it is worth noting we had 100 Thieves Challengers taking on Team Liquid first. And 100 Thieves, of course, is able to pick up the 2-0 win. Now, before we jump into anything, it is worth noting that 100T does have a substitution here, as we talked about last week. Sniper is out, obviously wishing him nothing but the best. Always take care of yourself before you take care of this game. I can say that about every single player that ever plays. You are bigger than whatever tournament you are currently playing in. If you need to take time off, always take time off. I said it about Mia on the other side here with TLF. You know, I said it about Danny. I'll say it about whoever, right? Take time off. You are more important. So, you know, best wishes to Sniper. I hope he's doing well. But they needed a substitute top, and so they went out and got Darshan, which is a pretty damn good, like, mid-season addition. Like, I can't believe that they were just able to go out and get him. Obviously, he's going to take some time to integrate, but he's going to slot right in as one of the best top laners in the NACL, basically immediately, like he has been for the past, I don't know, half a decade. Like, he's just been really, really good in this role for Cloud9 for so long that obviously as a mentor to some of these other players like Yukino in particular, it should be really, really good. But he was pretty solid in the series. Luckily, he didn't have to do too much because the rest of the roster really did take over. They were unbelievably good, unbelievably dominant, and this is what I wanted to see out of this bot lane. Again, I know there's been this crazy conversation surrounding 100 Thieves right now, where somehow a lot of people see this bot lane as underperforming, and my only explanation for why people would believe that is that people just assumed that Unforgiven was going to come in and go undefeated, right? Like, they just were never going to lose a game. He was going to be better than every single player on every other team combined. And I like Unforgiven as much as the next guy, but I didn't necessarily think that was going to be the case. I didn't even have 100 Thieves as my best team in the NACL going into the season. So I'm okay with how they've played, which is like a top 1, top 2 bot lane, you know, at times. I still think that's good enough, right? Especially with the way Destiny has been playing in the support position. I think there is a real argument to be made that Destiny is like the MVP of the NACL this split. I think if I had a vote, he'd probably be my MVP. Obviously, I don't know how the top prospect award works. You know, obviously, if it was top prospect, I'd probably give it to someone else just because Destiny has had some time on the LCS stage. I'm not sure he qualifies, but him and Unforgiven are really freaking good, and they were really freaking good in this series in particular. Unforgiven's gonna get player of the series. Destiny was a super close second when they are able to take over, when they play bot lanes that are just worse than them, and unfortunately, LJX and Rovex are just not on the same level as Unforgiven and Destiny. They just look unstoppable, and that's what I want to see out of 100 Thieves. If this team is going to make a big run towards the finals, be one of the best teams in the NACL, it's probably going to run through this bot lane, and honestly, I have a lot of faith that these two are going to be able to do it. So another really good performance coming out from them. Yukino and Pretty were also really solid. Yukino in particular, I know I've been very critical of Yukino over the course of the season, but I still think he's a really solid young jungler. He's just learning, right? It's just going to take a little bit of time. I'm allowed to criticize him for maybe some of the mistakes that he's making now, because I have plenty of faith that within a year or two, he's going to look like the best the best jungler at this level, and it's not going to be particularly close. I have a lot of faith that Yukino and his talent is going to work through. I just need to see a little bit more right now with some of the players surrounding them, especially if 100 Thieves is going to contend. But luckily, he was really good in this series. Citywitty, one of the highest damage percentage junglers in the league, because the rest of the team really doesn't do a lot of damage outside of Surdy, who's playing a low damage role in general, and so not exactly the easiest of competition for Yukino to go into, but he was definitely the better jungler in this series. Love to see the Viego coming out more for a lot of these NACL players. I don't like the pick. I don't think Viego is very good right now, but I think if you are very good at Viego, you should play him, and a lot of these players have playstyles that capitalize really well on what Viego offers, which is a relatively fine early game and then the ability to take over in the back half. Kind of similar to Graves, but I think Graves is just bad right now. We'll talk about that when we get to Citywitty, and then of course the Wukong coming out in Game 2 is solid. Pretty, I still think I've been a little bit underwhelmed with. He was good in this series. I don't want to take that away. He was definitely better than Aspect, but Aspect looked competitive. This is a player who I think has had some ups and downs, a lot more ups recently than maybe he had at the beginning of the season, but I was really hoping Pretty was going to get a confidence booster, just kind of destroying Aspect in the series. That didn't necessarily happen. It was relatively even in the mid lane, and it was jungle and bot that really generated, I would say, that lead for 100 Thieves, but at the very least, that lead was generated, and that's the important part after all. As for TLF on the other side, this is probably the second worst team in the NACL. I would say FlyFam is a little bit more competitive right now than what TLF is able to put out, which is what we saw in the end of season power rankings that I put out, where I had them listed as, 15th in the power rankings. Unfortunately, they have the worst bot lane in the NACL currently performing, and they had to go into probably the best bot lane in the NACL, so a pretty bad matchup, just objectively speaking. They didn't really have a lot of options. Rovex is going to get my dud of the series. LJX wasn't particularly great either, but at the very least, he was playing safe on the Jhin in Game 2. Rovex was trying to make plays on the Ashe, and they just weren't working out. That Ashe is super punishable if she's not able to get the snowball going, especially if the rest of the team doesn't have a ridiculous amount of damage. You're playing Jhin Rise, and so you're really lacking for damage coming out of your carry rolls. You're relying a lot on this Graves to end up being a force in the late game, and I just don't know how predictable that is with how that champion is in the current meta right now, which is to say, just a little bit not in meta in the sense that farming junglers aren't very good. We kind of saw that with Karthus earlier on in the week. I think Graves is in a pretty similar position. You don't want to wait to make an impact on the game from the jungle position. You're going to be too far behind, and we did see that a bit, but at the very least, this bot lane could have stepped up and contributed a little bit more. I just don't think that they are quite ready for this level. If TLF ends up getting relegated, I wouldn't be entirely surprised. I do think that is super unfortunate for a player like Surdy in the top lane, who I would hope would be able to get some sort of challenger spot in the league, because he is way too good to be playing an amateur, and he showed that off. I think there's a real case to be made. He's been like a top 3 or 4 top laner this split, especially considering the circumstances. He's just been really good in lane. He's been really solid out of lane. He just hasn't had a lot of opportunities to be able to win the game, because if your best player is on the top side of the map and the rest of your team is losing, it's going to be very difficult to be able to win that game. So unfortunately, Surdy just ends up, on a losing team. Really still like him as a player. I think Aspect has gotten better over the course of the year. Still don't know exactly what you're getting out of that mid lane, but bot lane's been a little bit of an issue. Jungle's very over-aggressive, except when he's playing Graves. I just don't think this TLF team is very good, and I think we're going to see that in the lower bracket. And then for 100 Thieves on the other side, this is a nice win. Of course, not a super surprise here. You're really going to need to start building some momentum. This is a team that, again, has finals aspirations. Unforgiven, Destiny in the bot lane should be in finals. There really is no excuse for them not being able to make it. This is, of course, a good start, but they got to be able to keep it up. Consistency is something this team has really struggled with over the course of the year, and it's going to be interesting to see if that changes throughout the playoffs here. Moving on to our third series of day 2 here, and this is one I was very intrigued to see, a team that is very much on the up and up, taking on a team that certainly isn't going to be beaten easily. We had FlyQuest Challengers, the number 7 seed, taking on the number 10 seeded Immortals Challengers, and FlyQuest does get the job done in a 2-0 series win. I definitely had FlyQuest being the stronger team in this series, and that is absolutely no flame to Immortals, who I think is definitely looking better as of recent weeks. Of course, we'll talk about the mid lane situation in just a second, because they ended up playing a different mid laner in each game, but for FlyQuest, this team has just looked unstoppable in recent weeks. They finally got their full roster in. Masu got his visa and is finally playing on actually 0 ping. Winsome is back down here in the NACL after obviously taking Ayla's spot in the LCS for quite a bit due to his own visa issues, so FlyQuest getting a lot solidified right before the playoffs, and this team has looked utterly unbeatable in that stretch. Of course, they've lost one game, but one game is one game at the end of the day. Outside of that, this team has looked fantastic, and Masu and Winsome in particular look indomitable in the bot lane. Masu's going to get my player of the series here since he has come into the country, since he has actually started playing, not remotely with the team. He has looked like the best AD carry in the region. I was talking a bit earlier about how Destiny's probably been my MVP, but, maybe not top prospect just because he's already at least played in the LCS. You want top prospect, it's Masu. I mean, Masu has been so ridiculously good over the course of the NACL split, and he only got better in the last few weeks. Winsome has obviously helped out with that a lot. He is a class support. He is really good at his job. He's much better at these tanky, engage style champions, things like the Nautilus. He's obviously very good at the Thresh as well, but pulling out the Braum in game 2, he's able to pick that up and play it with the Aphelios, be a nice little protect player into something like the Blitzcrank. We've seen Blitz be a huge problem for a lot of teams in the playoffs and in the regular season in the NACL up until this point, so it's good to see Masu and Winsome kind of be able to outplay that a bit, but they're just so good. I mean, they're right up there with Unforgiven and Destiny, with Lost and Zazel, with Array and Prismal. You could argue that they are better than all of them. That's how good this FlyQuest bot lane has been. It's no surprise at all to see them playing at such a high level in this series, and you're just going to be able to hope that they keep it up. If they play like this, FlyQuest is a top 2 team, like legitimately a finals contender in the NACL. The other players that you got to shout out here, Yuji in the jungle, he was like underratedly really good in this series. I'm so happy to see Yuji starting to step out of his shell a bit. I've been kind of low on him as the season has gone. I think that there are definitely some series that he kind of underperformed a bit in, but I think for the most part, especially towards the back half of the year, he's really got his working shoes on. Him and Philip have both been kind of in that same boat where it felt like they were, I don't want to say coasting, because that's not really how it felt at the beginning part of the season, but certainly their performances weren't necessarily up to par, I would say, at the start of the year. And as we get further along and further along and further along, it felt like they finally got a little bit more comfortable playing together again after having summer off with Philip up in LCS. And so they've really been a lot better. Spirax is still kind of inconsistent. Definitely had some moments in that game, too, on the Akali that looked awesome. Had some moments where it was like, what you doing? But that's going to happen. I still think Spirax is an incredibly fun player to watch and somebody who can genuinely take over games at this level. It's just about the consistency with him. But when you've got a bot lane like Masu and Winsome, you can kind of afford to take some more risks up on the top side because you know you're going to have that stability on the bot side. As for Immortals on the other side, quickly talk about the mid lane situation. Again, I can't reiterate this enough. I do watch these games sped up, spoiler alert, and so I don't actually get to listen to a lot of the commentary. I don't know what was going on between Balulu and Yasui and why they didn't just play Yasui both games if they wanted to play him game 2 anyways. I mean, if you were going to play Balulu, I just imagine you would play him for both because he's probably the better player and he's had the entire year to get used to playing with this roster, but it is what it is. Again, I don't really know. You guys will probably let me know down in the comment section below what ended up happening there, or if it was never explained. If they just wanted to play both games, that's fine, but Yasui was actually pretty solid in the game 2 on the Gragas. Wasn't exactly given a champion that he was supposed to be able to take over the game with, but did a decent job trying to stop the Akali. It's a miserable matchup to play that, or at least I would assume. Again, I've never really played the matchup, and so I'm sure you mid lane experts will let me know down in the comment section below. It just doesn't seem like a matchup where you're going to have a ton of agency in the lane. Maybe you're going to be able to win a little bit early, or at least survive a little bit early, but eventually Akali's just going to be more useful than you, especially if she starts roaming and getting out on the map with her team. But you're playing with the Lee Sin, you might be able to generate some early leads. Unfortunately, it just wasn't the case. Jungle felt like it had a little bit of an issue this game. Again, Chad hasn't exactly been someone that stood out to me as like a big star at this level up until this point. I love Chad as a person and as a player. He's shown a lot of promise, especially when he was on 100 Next, but it just hasn't come to fruition on this Immortals organization in particular. But my dud of the series is going to go to ADD in the top lane. He just has no consistency, man. It looked like he was starting to settle down a bit. I was kind of feeling him on the same train as a player like Concept, who had a really rough start to the year, but, as the year went on, he just got more consistent and more confident in his ability. Felt like ADD was getting close to that, and then he has another series like this where it's like, never mind, man. The aggressiveness of ADD is sometimes just going to get perma-punished. And that's what happened here. 2 games of Gnar. He genuinely has been one of the worst players in the NACL. I just don't really get, the hype around him. I know that there was a lot going into Worlds, and obviously I was kind of on the train where, like, people were saying he was going to flame out in the NACL, and I was like, no, at least a bad player on Worlds isn't okay, at the very least player in the NACL. The difference between this and Latin America can't be, like, that massive, right? But ADD has come in, and he's been pretty much a disaster for this Immortals team from day number 1. Not exactly sure what to say about this top side. It's just not inspiring me with a lot of confidence. I like Wixie. I like Joey. I especially like how they've been starting to pair up and be a little bit more explosive early on in games. That was my biggest criticism when it came to Wixie, is it felt like this team really wasn't playing towards bot side all that much in the early game, which is just not... We're in the meta where you really want to do that. And it feels like the team is a little bit more confident trying to give that to a player like Wixie, to a player like Joey now, because they've kind of proven in the recent weeks that they are able to carry games if given the resources. The unfortunate part is that they're going up against Masu and Winsome. This is just never going to be a strong side of the map for you when you're going into probably the most talented bot lane duo in the entire league. Very, very difficult to ask them to be able to take over the game. I thought Wixie and Joey were actually pretty solid here. The Jinx pick was actually really crucial and kept them in a lot of these fights. Unfortunately, there just wasn't a lot else on the map for them to be able to do. Certainly no damage in that game 2 coming out except for the Jinx, and so it was really hard to win team fights, and for the most part they just get outscaled. But that's going to happen every once in a while. I still think this Immortals team is okay. I think FlyQuest being at the number 7 seed is preposterous. They struggled at the start of the year. They've been incredibly hot as of recent. This team is much better than this seeding kind of is granted for, and I think that's unfortunate for a team like Immortals, who I think realistically could have gone up against some of the other teams that are maybe above them in the standings, just maybe not FlyQuest. So this team is still solid, especially on the bot side of the map, but top side's really got to get its shit together because right now they're just not performing at a high level. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, good team. They're really, really, really good, and teams are still going to underrate them because they haven't won a critical series. I think this next upcoming series is going to be absolutely massive for them. They play Dignitas Challengers in round 2. That is going to be a super telling and super fun series to watch. I, for one, have my money on FlyQuest being able to take that series, especially after seeing this. I think this team is really, really good, and I think this bot lane is going to keep popping off. And then moving on to our 8th and final series of the video here. Remember, I'm only covering winners round 1. All the other games in round 1 as well as round 2 are going to be in the follow-up video. Do not worry about that. But finishing off winners round 1, we have a matchup between the 6-seeded CLG Challengers and the 11th-seeded TSM Challengers. Funny to see these two teams facing off in the bracket. And it's an upset because TSM is able to pick up the 2-1 win after going down in game number 1. Huge comeback win from a team that I did not have faith was going to be able to pick up the series, but the curse of CLG Academy, the curse of CLG Challengers strikes again. This team fails to perform when they were really highly touted coming out of the regular season, just like they did in 2022. I don't even really know what to say at this point. We'll talk about it a bit. I hope it's not in the players' heads, but I'm worried that it might be. Let's talk about TSM just a bit first, though. The players that I had the most question marks about stepped up in this series, most notably my player of the series in Doxa in the mid lane. I've been very harsh, very, very harsh and critical of Doxa, especially recently. It really felt like TSM was starting to find its groove in a few of the other lanes. Haunter's just been great all year long. Easily this team's best player all year in that top lane position, but again, you know, I said this before, only so much you can do in that top lane role. Then you've got Neo coming in. I think he's honestly been an upgrade over to what Wild Turtle offered. I think Wild Turtle's an upgrade to the main roster. I think Neo is an upgrade to the NACL roster. I just think both teams needed a little bit of a shakeup, needed some new faces, and I think Neo has provided that here. Dragku, I think, has gotten a little bit better, but jungle mid has just not been a strength for TSM over the course of the year. I know Svenskaren's stats look relatively good, but he will make a random play every single game that will just lose his team the game. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? Where are you going? What are you trying to do? And it's not usually 1. Usually it's like 4. And that's okay. I would say luckily in this series, a lot of his ints were purposeful. He would go in a team fight, get his ult off, immediately die because he went too early. But the team would have enough damage to be able to pick up on it. So that's a positive. But really the big positive to come out of this series is Doxa in the mid lane. Again, me being critical, I think, has been justified. Like, I don't want it to seem like, oh, I was just wrong about him. I just think he's had a lot of bad games over the course of the split, but all those bad games do not matter if you perform when it counts the most, and that is here in the playoffs. And let me tell you, he absolutely performed today. Really good on the Ahri in both games 1 and 3, but most specifically 3. And then the Sylas in game 2 was really good as well, but this was his world, and we were just living in it. He's going into one of the stronger players, let alone mid laners, in the entire entire region, in the entire league. Right now in Copy, who's had a phenomenal season for CLG. Unfortunately for them, Doxa was not to be stopped. He was able to take over the game in the mid game. He was able to take over late game. Obviously, put him on a champion like Silas or like Ari. You know, these pseudo-assassins that can play a little bit more of a supportive role. Ari with the charm and with the mobility. Silas with the, you know, utility that his ultimate just naturally gives him, especially with something like a Jarvan or a Cho'Gath or Renata on the enemy team. There's a lot of utility coming out with that. But also can do a lot of damage. Like, Ari and Silas can just kill people if they need to, and so it's just a lot of flexibility if you are able to get ahead and if you are able to get out on the map. And luckily for TSM, he was able to do that. If he's able to play like this, I mean, TSM actually is a little bit of a scary team, and that's something we got to keep in mind. But it wasn't just Doxa. Again, everybody else on the team played well. Neo had some really good positioning in the back half. Dragku was awesome. I love Xayah and Rakan for this bot lane duo, not because Neo was like especially dominant on Xayah as opposed to his other champions, but because Dragku I think is especially dominant on this Rakan. I mean, he is awesome on this champion. Another NACL player that is really good at Rakan. He's facing one in this series in Breezy, who's been fantastic on that champion over the course of the year, but Dragku definitely falls into that category. He nearly got my player of the series. If it wasn't for Doxa being able to take over that last game, Dragku would have got it, but he's been really good. I thought Sven, like I said, his engages were fine, even if his scoreline is kind of meh. And Hansard just wins in the top lane. It's just what he does. The most underrated player in the NACL, if only because no one's going to talk about how well he is doing, because no one cares about top lane right now, unfortunately. But Hansard's awesome, and he's been awesome for a while. As for CLG on the other side, unfortunate. I mean, this is just not what you wanted to see happen. This is not a team that should be getting bounced in the first round of winner's bracket. They should definitely not be losing to a team like TSM, who has, quite frankly, struggled up until this point. Yes, they had a good series here, but to allow them to basically get everything they wanted, not only in draft, but in the game as well, it's just disappointing. My dud of the series is going to go to Breezy in the support position. I've been really high on Breezy throughout the split, obviously all time. Big ASU fan, forks up, so gotta respect my boy Breezy, but this was not his best series at all. He kind of got outplayed in draft. Getting the Rakan on the other side was absolutely huge, and then him having to play the Renata a couple games, he finally gets the Thresh in game 3, but it doesn't really matter. The playmaking tools are just not there, and he's kind of getting picked on by Doxa roaming down. You know, these over-engages. He's very fragile and a little bit blow-upable, I would say, in late-game teamfights, and we definitely saw that. It was just kind of a support gap in this series, and that's unfortunate to say, because again, this feels like regression for CLG, whose bot lane had been getting better. Meech, I've always been a little bit on. Again, the dude is ridiculously mechanically talented, but sometimes he doesn't have that it factor that I really look for. I want him to try and make some of these more aggressive plays, but he was just outplayed by Neo. Not gonna blame him entirely here, but again, just very low impact, especially in their losses. It felt like he was playing more to just not lose than to win the game in a game where everyone else on his team was losing. And really, at that point, what's the point? But the top side of the map is really where things went wrong as well, you know, alongside Breezy. Jenkins got outplayed by Hansard. It's okay. Hansard's outplayed everybody this year. Kevy didn't really have a ton of impact in the final few games. I thought he was fantastic in that game 1 on the Viego, obviously, but the second part of this series was just not good. And Copy, like, for as much as I love Copy, he should not be getting outplayed and outroamed by Doxa. It just can't be happening. This was a mid lane game to win, and Copy just couldn't get it done. CLG is going to be disappointed with this result, and justifiably so. They're now going to have to go on a pretty big winning streak in loser's bracket to make it to where they probably feel like they want to be in terms of their skill level. Now, it's not out of the question. This team still is incredibly talented, and they should be able to take care of business with a lot of the other teams that get sent down to loser's bracket, but they should never have been in this situation in the first place, and it really does put a lot of question marks surrounding whether or not this team is going to be able to get it done. Remember, this is what happened last year as well, and they only changed out one member. Hopefully, the mental on this team stays good, but getting reverse swept here by TSM cannot be a good feeling. As for TSM, this is great. This is already more than you ever could have asked for. They could not win a single game the rest of the playoffs, and I'm sure they would probably walk out of this feeling remotely happy. They are a team that I think was feeling very lucky to be given a circumstance to play a team that was maybe underperforming in CLG this series, and hopefully they're able to capitalize on it. They've got an incredibly tough next series against 100 Thieves Challengers that, again, I just doubt they're going to be able to take advantage of, but if Doxa can step up, if Sven can have some pressure in the early game and can contribute in these team fights, Hansard's been good, Neo and Dragku have been good, there is an opportunity for them to steal a game or two against a team like 100 Thieves, and that would be incredibly wild. Certainly not something that I'm predicting, but TSM definitely showed signs of life in this series. Alright, that is going to do it for my NACL Winners Round 1 overview and analysis. We covered all 8 series. We now have our round 2 set up, as well as our losers round 1, both of which will be covered in a video later this week. Wanted to split them up just so we don't overload on a lot of these videos. I like going a bit more in depth on some of these series than maybe I did the regular season ones because of the importance. So I hope you guys like the format. And of course, let me know what you guys thought of the video down in the comments section below. What team do you think overperformed? What team do you think underperformed? Who are you impressed by? Who do you think might make a secret run now that we're getting into, you know, real playoff time? We're getting closer and closer to the best of 5s. Who do you think is going to be making a shocking run to finals or top 3? Or something like that? You guys probably have a good idea of who I think it could be. FlyQuest is definitely on my radar. The Cincinnati Fear are definitely on my radar as teams that could potentially be making a finals, maybe next to a team like Cloud9. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback, of course. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Not only does it mean a lot to me because it lets me know that you guys are enjoying the content, but it does help put this into the algorithm, especially in the first 24 hours. So it really would mean a lot if you guys hit that like button. And of course, if you are new here, hit subscribe. Not only do I cover the NACL on this channel, I cover all 4 of the major regions as well every single week. Regular season, playoffs, whatever we need to do. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything that happens weekly in LoL esports, this is the channel for that. And I would really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. I promise if you enjoyed this, you'll enjoy the rest of my content as well. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.